Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Cynthia McGuigan. Lovely to have you on the show, Cynthia. Really looking forward to this.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
So Cynthia's a foster care alumnus, and she's also a birth mum. And I'm getting goosebumps all over right now. We've been talking for about 10, 15 minutes, but just now I'm getting goosebumps because talking to birth mums and understanding what they have been through, I think, is one of the most healing things that we can do. So I started looking for my birth mum only probably like 10 years after she'd already died 10 years before. So I get a bit, I get a bit of juice. I get a bit of birth mum juice when I talk to a birth mum, and I explain, I kind of relive my biggest healing moments when I'm talking to birth mums.
Well, that's so kind of you to say that.
Yeah. So my birth mum was Patricia Joan Flower.
Oh, beautiful name.
Yeah. And last year, I think it was, I had one of the first birth mums, probably about 5 birth mums on the show, I think so. She was called Patricia Jean Florin. So she's got the same initials, right?
Oh, wow. That must have been awesome.
Like goosebump moments. So Cynthia placed her son back in August 83. So he's just had his 40th birthday. And you were saying before we started that you were told to forget. You told to forget your son, yeah.
Never forgot. Never wanted to forget, but it was an idea you bought into, that if you could forget, maybe you could move on. But I never forgot him one day. Every day I think of him, and on holidays and special memories, I miss him even more. But not a day goes by that I don't have a thought of him.
Yeah. And we touched on something today that we talked about when we spoke last month about your son saying he says he can't do two worlds, and this had I scribbled it down, but I couldn't remember the context for it. So could you tell us the listeners a little bit more about that?
Okay, I had contacted him either on his 30th or his 35th birthday. I hadn't heard from him in a while. I was basically told to leave him alone. But I was starting to see 1983 everywhere. It was the hottest summer since 1983 and all this. So I'm like, this is a sign. I'm supposed to call him. I have his number, always had his number. So I picked up the phone, and he was going away with his adoptive mom. And he said, and I had asked him if he would go to dinner with us. He's like, you know what? When I return from vacation, I'll call you. So I assumed that he had talked to his adoptive mom. He's very close to her. I've met her. And he came back. He said, you know what? I really would like to see you. He goes, but I just can't be in two worlds. I just can't do it. I have a lot going on. At that time, he wasn't married. He was trying to get through college. And even though he was older, he was trying to get through college, and I had figure out what he was going to do with the next steps of his life. And I understood it. After all my years in American Adoption Congress, attending workshops, being counseled by Joyce Pavo, I understood what he was saying to me. I heard it. It was his voice, and I had to listen to it.
Yeah. So there's understanding it, and there's understanding it. I mean, you must have been understanding. On one level, you're understanding it, and on the other level, you're completely gutted.
I am gutted. It's I am gutted because I know that you can love more than one family. I had 5 foster homes, I had a lot of moms. I mean, my mom was always and will always be my first mom, but I loved other people, other foster moms that helped me. I didn't want to take the place of his mom. I just wanted to be part of his world. But so I understood it and I was able to hear it, but and though I heard it with less pain, it was still painful. It was still okay, this is it. I just ran across pictures of when I had his mother to my house before we met him. He was 12, 13, and that would be over, oh God, 30 years ago. And I sent them to him. And I said, this was before we met you. And the girl in that picture, the woman who had a little girl on her lap, meeting his mom and having that conversation, had so much hopes for so much more of a relationship in the future that never, we had interactions with him. We had some meetings with him. We had some times with him, but what I had hoped for is not what I got. And I get that. And I'm so happy when I hear a story about somebody that does have that, but I don't have that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which kind of takes us on to the resilience topic that you thought could be the starting point for today. Yeah. So why is resilience? What is resilience?
Resilience is, it is the capability to rebound from trauma, to rebound, and we all have trauma, we all have situations, but how some of us rebound and heal. My trauma started when I was younger. I was in foster care because at the time my dad had become a severe alcoholic and had beaten my mom. He never touched us, but in turn, my mom would hit us and hit us bad. And I had gotten to a point where I had forgotten about this till I reconnected with a good friend of mine this year. We had our own reasons why we couldn't be together, be it family lives. And she reminded me the day that I ran away, I had told her that I was going to commit suicide. And she told me that I need to get you out of that house. And we ran away at 14 and 15 to a hotel. And the next day I went to the first social services and requested to be removed from my house. And so that resilience, I had to find that or dig deep for that. But my mom was resilient, even though we had this traumatic relationship when I was younger. She was responding to the trauma of my dad because my mom was in a home with an alcoholic aunt who beat her. So she saw me aging to 13 and she was being beaten by her husband. And so I think she had an emotional breakdown and didn't know how to handle everything. So I left and I lived in 5 foster homes in 5 years, one being the Creans. And the Creans helped me reconnect with my mom. And at that time, my parents had healed a lot. My dad had became a recovered alcoholic. My mom, we worked hard on that relationship, my mom and I, and to come to an understanding. But you have to realize my mom was raised in orphanages to the age of 14 when her mother died in a home for unwed mothers after childbirth. So my mom was raised by nuns. What made me understand my mom's childhood was when I was enrolled in a Harvard course during my degree program, and it was about executive functions. I don't think my mom ever had the ability to gain those executive functions because she didn't have a loving family that she was with. She was with nuns that didn't provide that for her. So it was a generational trauma, but she was also very resilient. She survived that and she tried to provide for the family. It only got bad when my dad's drinking got bad. And I had to dig deep inside of me to survive those teenage years without my mother. At one point, I was asked if I wanted to be adopted. I was about 15. I was in foster care. and I didn't want to be adopted. I did not. I wanted my family fixed, and that's exactly what I said to him. I got an overwhelming, the feeling I felt when somebody wanted to take me from my family, and I wasn't even living with my family. It was so overwhelming, scary, and devastating. That's not what I wanted for myself. So in a way, I don't understand what it is to be an adoptee. I can't say that, but I can understand wanting my family. I can understand wanting my roots.
Yeah. The word that came to me as you were describing your, the impetus to run away, the decision to run away, was kind of like a grown up maturity, a wisdom, a kind of like taking control of the situation, and that's the thing that hit me at 14. Yeah.
It was an amazing experience in the sense that I have two life altering experiences that I find. One was that was one of the biggest life altering experiences, in the sense that I had to stand in front of a judge with my parents in the background and my two brothers and say my parents weren't fit to be parents. That killed me to say that. I did not want to hurt my parents that way. I still today say that was one of the hardest things I had to do in my life. I was 12, and I'm making this decision. And the second one, and the most difficult, other than the last thing that happened last year, was giving my child away. That trumped that experience of telling my parents they weren't good enough. Giving my son away would be the other second life altering decision in my life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they're all around adoption and foster care. And where social services didn't come in, and reunite me with my parents, because at that time they didn't have a unification. A foster mother did. A foster mother who understood another mother's pain took that steps. And my foster parents, Barbara and Richard Crean, had the best relationship with my parents. The third problem that was life altering is my mother died last year, and I was with her for it. And when she left this world, I screamed a scream I never thought was there, because I worked on that bond, of building that bond back with my mom, of making sure that my children respected my mom, that my children had the best relationship with my mom, because my trauma was not my children's trauma. But truthfully, the relationship I had with my mother at the end was beautiful. And that friend that helped me run away met up with my mom again after years of not knowing her and knowing the person that I ran away from. And they had 3 hours together that they weren't supposed to have. And it was a beautiful situation for them, because they both healed from a very traumatic event that took a daughter from a mother, and a child that was blamed for that. My friend was blamed for that situation. So much so that this person that I still consider friends, this Michaela, we weren't able to see each other. So I was taken away from a person who had helped me, loved me, and cared about me, and wasn't able to see her. So all this trauma that happened to me early in life, I had to be resilient from that. I had to recover from that, or I wouldn't have made it. But that is based on your social supports, your surrounding community, and knowledge. So some of that came with me learning knowledge. Some of that came with me building in the adoption community. The adoption community healed me in ways that I couldn't explain to somebody unless you were a part of it. I mean, going to adoption conferences year after year meeting people and getting to know them. And also, when I joined American Adoption Congress, I did it to help, but what I didn't realize was how I was going to be helped. And it was a beautiful thing, and I forever treasure those moments.
Yeah. I mean, you're there's power in that community. There's healing power in that community, and as well, it's the inner strength too.
Yeah.
About, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, coming up 3 years ago now, I was speaking to a researcher who was into like trauma research, and I was saying, so what's the difference that makes the difference? And I think this was different sorts of trauma, not just adoption trauma. I think there's some PTSD, military stuff as well. And
yes.
I just heard this statistic. I don't know if you've got this. You've been anywhere near this, but what percentage of people that go through, this is military, operation stuff, right? Like warfare.
Yeah.
What percentage would you estimate of the service, the armed forces that go into war zones and are exposed to potentially traumatic, what percentage of them get PTSD? What would you guess is the percentage?
I would say 90%. I was just watching Band of Brothers with my husband, and it's just, am I right?
No, it's the other way. It's the other way around. Band of Brothers is a great show.
Oh, because they have resilience.
Well, the number is, it depends, and obviously these are the round numbers. It's between 10 and 20%, right?
Interesting.
So last time I shared something with this, they said, well, there'll be a shame, a less, there'll be a shame, so people will self-report lower because they're considered that, So, so that aside, I said, so I was talking to this PTSD researcher, right? I said, so what's the difference that makes the difference? And she started reeling off all these factors. And I said, well, all those factors are external. What about the internal factors? And she couldn't answer the question. And at that point, I just lost all respect for her.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, you don't know, you can't answer. You're not. Are you in the right job? Obviously, I'm British, and I would never say that to anybody.
No, but you're thinking it.
But I'm thinking it. And it stayed with me because I'm sharing it with you 3 years on. And it's because and the reason I'm sharing it, the reason I'm pointing at it is, like, we have to see our own resilience for ourselves.
Yes.
Yes. And it's as you were talking about your mum and your dad and yourself.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, Simon Ben has simplified this. Do you know what he's it's two camps. It's either trauma or it's resilience. And it's I've oversimplified it, as I tend to do. I put things into black and white, right? And this internal and external stuff, it's both. It's not. It's the internal. It's the insight. It's seeing our own.
Exactly.
Seeing our own strength, seeing our strength for ourselves, and it's the pointers that we get, it's the lessons that we learn, as well. But like when I'm talking see it for ourselves, I'm talking about not just like a vague notion. I'm not
Mhm.
talking about a fleeting idea. Oh yeah, I can see my strength. I'm talking like an embodied, lived experience, which you clearly had. So yeah, no, what do you make of all that?
I think it helped a lot because I remember before I met Joyce. So Joyce was one of the first places, Joyce Pavo. She had a weekly support group for birth moms that was run by a birth mom at her organization in Cambridge. And I would go at lunchtime because I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And having my experiences acknowledged and witnessed. It was the unwitnessed grief, the unwitnessed experiences, and the hiding. I was told not to tell anybody. Like my husband's family didn't know for decades that we had another child. We're married now, have 3 daughters, but he was the birth father. And that unwitnessed, and when I would go up to his family and in Canada, who were up in Canada, had no idea. I would carry that pain with me every year until I finally started telling them about what our son, and that was hard. So I think that I agree, you're right, that to have that support source and then to internalize it and to internalize in the sense that then you start healing. You start looking at what does this mean for me? What is this experience? I can't go back and change time. I can't. If I could, I would, but I can't.
It's a Cher song, isn't it?
What?
It's-
It probably is. Recently a question was asked in a group. If it's with older women. If abortion was legal, would you? Now, I was of the time that you could. And my foster brother overheard me call him Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood would grant you an abortion if you could go in front of a judge, again, going in front of a judge to ask them and explain the process. He told this foster mother, Mrs. Crean, where I was with this. Mrs. Crean pulled me aside and said, I'll support you in anything you do, but I want you to realize that people have not forgotten their abortions. Now, that she wasn't playing with me, but I can see how that could have been construed wrong, but it wasn't. And it was in that moment that I thought if I had to never forget something, I wanted something good to come out of it. And for me, I'm still happy my son's alive, that he has children, and that he lived. Like that, I made the choice that way. What along with that came 40 years of pain, 40 years of pain and trying to reconcile that myself. And I don't know why I chose that path, but that is the path I chose. And I believe there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
But internalizing that and figuring that out took a long time, a lot of work to get where I am today. And I'm still working on it. With recently today being involved in life coaching, which has helped me greatly.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you define healing?
Woo, that's a big one. It's different for everybody, isn't it? It's different for me. Healing is being able to sit in the space that I am and not break down and cry today. Or maybe I do break down and cry today. But being able to recognize I did the best I could have back then, that I'm able to appreciate what I have now and understand that I had no other choice. And the biggest thing I had to do was forgive myself. And that was really hard. And I don't know if I'm all the way there yet. I didn't believe in myself enough. And I'm angry at myself for that. If I believed in myself the way I do now, I would have been able to raise my son. I would have. I've always found a way to do stuff.
Wow.
I didn't believe in myself enough. And the professionals didn't help in that area either.
No, no.
No, they told me I couldn't, that I'd be
Yeah.
selfish to keep my child. They deserve two parents. And the ironic part to this whole story is my son's mother divorced when he was 3, and he was raised by a single mom.
I don't know whether you told me that or I just felt that coming, but you set that up. So it felt like me that what you were describing was the end of regret.
The end of what?
The end of regret.
Yeah, I guess I am. Like that I'm at the end of regret.
Yeah. I did the best I could. I had no other choice. Angry at self, and then kind of like a sinking in. Like that looks to me like an iceberg called regret. I don't know. That's melted somewhere.
Yes, yes. I, I had it. So there's angry birth moms and there's angry adoptees. And I sometimes wonder if the angry adoptees realize what their birth mothers were facing at the time they were facing it, not at the age they were facing it, because times change, right? And I've met a lot of birth mothers. My first interactions were with older birth mothers, because a lot of the birth mothers, I was always the youngest in the crowd. And we faced a lot. I was never told, we'll support you. You can have this baby. Not one person in my life. I was taken to by my husband's, by my boyfriend's mother to confession because I was so bad, and I was kicked out of the house that I now own. It was my boyfriend's house, and told not to come back because I was pregnant and I was showing, and what would the neighbors say? So I was put with a shield of shame. And so I've understood that through that process, nobody said, hey, let me give you a hand. Let me walk you, other than my birth mother. And believe it or not, I do have to share that my parents that I ran away from and reconnected with did offer to raise my son with me. But however, nobody did the work with us to heal us. So I thought, oh God, I'll be abusive like them. Oh God, I can't, no. It wouldn't have been that way. And I, again, didn't believe in myself to take that step, to take the hand that was given to me by the one true people that loved me and saw my baby as their grandbaby.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. Yeah, no, well, that makes out like I've spoke to hundreds of birth mothers, and I haven't. But I haven't heard that thing before. But I want to take you back a step to the confession, and I remember you mentioned I've got a note out about it last time. It was Catholic Charities. I mean, from what I can gather as a guy who went to a Protestant sort of school, right? Like we had a lesson every morning, we sung a hymn every morning, but that, it was, there was no feeling in the singing.
Yeah.
It seems to me that Catholicism is kind of founded on shame.
Yes, it is. It is. I've decided I'm not Catholic anymore. And that came up. I still will go to church with my husband sometimes because I like the priest, but I'm really not Catholic anymore. And I was really proud of being Catholic for a long time. I'm really not. They took my child and intentionally shamed me into being they took and told me I was not a mother. They took the one true thing that we have as women, being moms, and turned that against me.
Yeah.
And told me that I had to go to confession about this.
Yeah.
And
but weren't the people that you spoke to kind of marinated in Catholicism and shame? And
yes,
just, I was going to use the word brainwash, but I might get told off for saying that.
you know what, Simon, I felt like I was brainwashed. I really do. I would meet with them weekly, the counselor from Catholic Charities, and it was to groom me to be a birth mother.
Because I think I heard this from somebody. Did the Catholic Charities take money from the adoptive parents?
Oh yeah, I don't know how much, but I know it was over 10 grand. Oh yeah, they made themselves rich off of us. They did. That was one of their profitable programs, adoption.
In the UK, we've got a different system, and domestic adoption costs. There's some court fees, from what I can understand. Court fees, but there's so. I mean, the Catholic Church is still addled in shame in the UK, and it is, it is in as it is across the world, and yet there isn't, but there's not that price on our heads. I saw when I saw a price list for babies for adoption, and different colors, different prices, different ability, able-bodied and not able-bodied, different prices. I was nearly sick.
Yeah.
And
they put different prices on children of color.
Yeah.
It's really disgusting, really. Yeah.
And it sets up, it sets, that system sets up the space for the trafficking stuff.
Exactly. It was like we were trafficking with the Catholic Church.
And then we've got all these, and we've got all this stuff. Anyway, back to the point, back to the start. Okay, so we were saying what so healing we're saying is kind of it's a combination of I'm going to use a posh word I don't know, the dissipation. I don't know what that means. The dissolution of, we're back to Catholicism now, right? So it's the end of regret, or a massive chunk out of regret, and then maybe a little tiddly bit still there, right? A bit of unresolved.
Very little.
Just
very
a
little.
bit.
Regret that I'm not in his life.
Yeah. So what so that's what healing is to you, and I love the point that you started off by saying it's very different. It's different. What has helped that happen for you? What have been the driving forces, realizations?
I used to spend Mother's Day very sad. Mother's Day, his birthday. But I had 3 little kids, 3 little girls of my own. And I couldn't sit in that pain and change the course of the parent I was. I had to teach my children. My biggest advice from Joyce Pavo was start educating your children young. I started seeing Joyce when my first baby was 3 and 4. I think they were very young. So I would go, oh no, 2. And I would go home and she said, start little, just tell him pieces. So I would say, you have a brother called Donald. And so this is how young my daughter was. She says, Donald Duck. So it was building that because I didn't want it to be a secret. I didn't want to be shame for my children. I wanted it, I couldn't make the relationship. At that time, we had no idea where he was, nothing. But they grew up knowing that they had a brother. They grew up knowing that we had faced trauma, that we had, had to move through that. So what was the question again? Sorry.
Yeah. What were the the activities, the belief changes,
Okay.
the shift?
Okay, to change
What,
it to
what
this.
was it?
So that was one shift, is knowing that I had a shift. And I decided to celebrate on Mother's Day that I was a mother. I did have a baby. I did give birth to a child. He's a beautiful man. Someday I hope to have a face-to-face relationship for him. But for now, I am blessed to know where he is. I remember the days when I was riding the train in Boston and I'd be looking at kids his age, saying, wonder if that's him. That overwhelming feeling of not knowing where your child is a massive. It is crushing. It is devastating. When I found out that where my son was, and that's a story for maybe another day, at the age of 12, I was able to breathe. So that was another part of the healing. Other parts of the healing was
I
with
hope
my
he
education.
listens to this.
What?
I hope your son listens to this.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to interrupt you because it's. Do you know what? I'd be like gold dust. I'm crying.
Yeah. I
You're
another
disappointing
part
me. You're not crying. You're just keeping it. You're keeping it tough, right? I'm resilient. We're talking about resilience. I can't cry.
I know. I mean, I miss him. I miss
Yeah.
him a lot.
Yeah.
He has the same voice as my husband, and I'm not the only one that said this. I hear him talk, and I hear my husband. And I am grateful my mom got to meet him once. I wish I had my grandchildren. I wish I had my grandchildren and him. I wish my daughters had their brother. I do. If that's, he knows I love him. I've told him that. He's heard that. He knows I care about him. We're starting off slowly with the texting. I sent him the picture. I told him we recently had a new granddaughter, my daughter's daughter, and his niece. It's his niece. She was born at 2 pounds 7 ounces. She was a preemie. She was 14 inches long. She was a ruler, and she left the hospital. And he said, I'm thinking of her. He also said, when he sent me pictures, and I send him pictures back of the grandchildren, and he's on there, my daughter's Instagram, or his wife is. He said, I see the similarities. And most recently, his wife allowed me to be her Instagram person. And to me, that means I get a window into seeing my grandchildren. I get a window into seeing, I know what they look like. So many women I know, because I know the older generation, don't have what I have. And some people would say, that's not enough. It has to be enough. I have to accept it as enough until it's until the end, maybe. But he knows always that I cared and that I loved him. And he might not be able to be in both places, but I know it makes a difference. Because I remember one time when I thought I was going to be able to meet up with him again. And he said, I started the conversation with, I think of you always. And all of a sudden, he was a little boy again. And he said, you do? Of course I do. Of course I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
No different than my other children. No different. I wake up in the morning, I think of all of them. It's how I was raised. My mom thought of us all. It's
Yeah.
how we were raised. And, I'm missing the important moments in his life, but hopefully I'll still have more time for important moments.
And obviously, when this goes live, you can send him the link. You could do with another.
At least I didn't use his real name.
Sorry?
I didn't use his real name. So.
No. And I don't know that anyways. Yeah.
But I do have very interesting. Before my mom died, I never expected my mom to apologize for what we went through. And times in her life, she would reference it in the way of her pain. But 3 weeks before she died, she said, "I'm sorry for everything that happened," and remembered that she offered to help me when my son was born. I said, "I know, Mom, and it's okay. It's okay."
Did she know she was dying?
The biggest regret I have is I didn't tell her she was dying. I think I owed that to her, but it happened so fast in a way. My mom was 92. She lived a lovely life, but she lived a very hard life. A conversation also probably for another day. My mom did not have an easy childhood like I didn't. And she had the most pleasant personality when she was on point and would always like to people laugh. And I said one time, "Why do you do that? Flirt with this person." And she goes, "I like to leave the room laughing." And that's how I remember my mom.
The reason I asked if she knew that she was dying is because somebody came on the show the other week and they were talking about the death of a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, I can't remember who it was. They said something that I've experienced the opposite of. So they talked about the death of the parent. The parent didn't change.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was diagnosed very late with cancer and died
Mm-hmm.
6 weeks after the diagnosis.
Yeah.
But he changed significantly
Mm-hmm.
with that
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis. He became a gentler,
Mm-hmm.
gentler guy,
Mm-hmm.
and a, a, a mentor of mine that was very instrumental, an instrumental mentor, a very important mentor of mine,
Yeah.
a guy called Rich Wilkins. He he worked in a hospice for a while,
Mm-hmm.
volunteered in a hospice, and
Mm-hmm.
he said that the average person in the hospice is happier than the average person in the checkout at
Mm-hmm.
at the grocery store, at the supermarket.
Yeah. Believe
The
it or not, I'm starting hospice because that's one of my other things I do is a death doula. So it's been enlightening for me. I think she knew she was dying. It was my greatest honor to be there and with her. And my sister was with me, and my sister was also with me when I had my baby. So my husband, being shamed, was not there for the delivery of his son. So um I think my mom did know she was dying, but this was before she was dying. So, and I appreciated her apology, but never expected it and never really needed it. I knew we had healed. My dad had given me apology years ago before I don't talk about my dad only because he died over 20 years ago. I wish I had the adult relationship with him, but he was a beautiful man in the end with um no alcoholism and did really love me. So
yeah.
mm.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I I think that we really, to heal, we really need to understand both sides of the story. And I think we really need to do our work around it. And I'm not one to tell an adoptee what to do. I don't walk their path. But I do hope if there's birth mothers listening or birth fathers, they give their children the opportunity to speak, to have that cup of coffee,
Yeah.
and to to have a conversation. What harm does it do, right? I believe I owe that to my child. I owe that and much more to my child.
I want to ask you, you mentioned the life coaching. So I wanted to ask you what, before we close, what you've got from that. What?
Oh boy, did I get a lot from that. That was a 9-month program. I'm going to call this the Hobbit of life coaching. She's running a new program. Her name's Nancy Levine. She's wrote a lot of books, and I followed it up after I was involved in David Kessler's grief course, grief educator course, when my mother was dying. So it was just happened to be that I was in that, and Nancy was a guest in that. And so life coaching went through self-worth, self-love, boundaries, and shadow beliefs, and it all ties into going back and revisiting why we can't push forward. So it has been instrumental in me understanding how my past has gotten to the way of my future and the goals and the dreams that I have. And my dream is to help former foster youth who are now aged out. I've also been involved in another coaching program called Foster Success Coaching. And it's to help foster kids in college that struggle through where you might have support because you're with your family, or my children have support because they have us to turn to. A foster child like myself didn't have that because my parents at that time, again, we weren't that close. We had just reunited and they had their own things. So coaching for me provided an avenue to understand at a deeper level. Counseling was great. And if I probably didn't have counseling, I don't know how well I would have done at life coaching, but I had already done my work there. So life coaching provide that understanding. And I was not only coached at the beginning, I then had to coach others. And it was a great program to help me move forward. So now I'm in the advanced program, and I'm looking forward to taking the work to teach worthiness and boundaries. So in a group setting, so hopefully presenting more at work conferences around boundaries, because we need to understand our boundaries. And that's how the conversation started back up with my son. I asked him what his boundaries are, because I didn't want to cross them, but technically only others can, you allow others to cross your boundaries. So, but I wanted to be respectful also of what he wanted, because he's never been vocalized about what he wants. So I said, so what do you want and how often do you want it? And so that's where we came to an understanding of texting works right now and occasionally, which it still wasn't a quantitative. So it still leaves me a little bit like, well, what does that mean? That means, and fortunately, he said at the end, I'm sure you really want more than that, which I guess I could say I do, but I'm also realistic. And I'm also thankful again for what I have and access to see my grandchildren. I don't have to wonder what they look like. And I don't have to wonder what, like, how he's aging, which he's a very handsome man. So
Yeah, fantastic.
yeah.
I haven't done this for a while, but it just strikes me. Have you got a question for me?
Um, oh, let me think. I didn't think of that. So if you could ask your mother one question, what would it be? Your birth mother.
Uh, well, bearing in mind what I told you before we started recording, uh, yeah, just because of that, and because he's on my mind, what was he like?
Mm.
What was my birth father like?
Mm-hmm. I wish you had that chance for the conversation. My husband shares a similar situation like you. He did get one letter to his birth mother, but before he could meet her, she passed away. So I apologize that you didn't have that with your mom.
Yeah, I told you about the letter about the teddy bear, though, right? I told you about.
What's that?
Did I tell you about the letter about the teddy bear?
No, no,
Oh. Sorry, listeners, if you've heard this before.
no, tell me.
So I found out at 40 that the teddy bear was from my birth mum. Right, that was the start of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
8 years later, when I got the adoption file, there's a letter from my birth mum to the social worker
FaceTime video.
asking if saying that so the letter is 4 days after she's taken me to the adoption agency and she's placed me. And she writes a letter, and it starts off by thanking the social worker for the help. And then it goes on to say that she'd wanted to buy me a teddy bear. She'd wanted to stop at the store on the way to the agency and buy me a teddy bear.
Mm-hmm.
But the traffic had been too bad and she didn't want to be late for the appointment. So she couldn't buy the bear.
Oh.
And then, she talks about that making her feel upset over the weekend. And would the social worker ask my parents if they'd accept a teddy bear from her for me?
And they did.
And as I read that, I had some 20 seconds of anger and fear, very intense anger and very intense fear towards my birth mother. 20 seconds. And that evaporated because I saw that in that angry moment, the teddy bear had been a consolation prize, and it became clear to me that the teddy bear was a symbol of her love.
Okay.
As the tears ran down my face, they kind of washed away that anger and fear towards her. And I realized how wrong my belief was.
My sister took me out shopping after I had my son, and I bought him a rattle so that he would always have a rattle. Rattle. And it was a bone china with a silver heart. And he took that to show and tell one year, I was told.
Wow.
That's all I could give him. It's kind of like when my husband attended the wake of his mom and went to the gravesite. He had nothing to give her. She had passed. He asked the grave workers if he could bury her, because that's all he had left to give her.
Wow.
So I sat in the car crying, watching my husband give his birth mother something in her last days.
Yeah.
And I was reminded of my rattle that I gave him.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Thank you, Simon. It was very good talking to you.
Thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Check out Cynthia's socials on the show. Try